Control is probably the most important mechanic in EU5, yet the game barely explains how it actually works. So in the next few minutes I'm going to explain everything as simply and as quickly as possible. Let's start with an example. Imagine a location that generates 10 ducats, and you have 50% control there. It means half of those ducats are taxable, the rest going directly into the pockets of the estates. Simple, right? Unfortunately, it's a little more complex than that because of tax rate. If we refer back to our example, let's say there are 2 estates sharing power equally, each with a tax rate of 50%, meaning this location with 10 ducats, of which 5 are taxable, would net the treasury 2.5 ducats. Things would never be as neat as this, so let's use a real in-game example. Take a look at this location. It has a total wealth of 31 ducats, and a control rating of roughly 85%. This reduces our taxable income base down to 26 ducats. That wealth is distributed among the estates, with the traders getting the lion's share. In this location, there are 4 estates, but the church doesn't pay any tax. The remaining 3 estates each have a tax rate of around 48%. The end result? Your actual net income from this location is only 33% of its total wealth. We've looked how control works on a location level, now let's talk about how it spreads. In-game, there are 3 primary proximity sources: your capital and both governors, land and naval. There are a few other buildings like the Seljuk Mints, but these are our main ones. Every location costs 40 control to pass through. If your capital has 100 control, neighbouring locations will drop down to 60, locations neighbouring them will drop down to 20, and after that, all locations will be at 0, which is where things like roads and rivers come into effect. When travelling up or down a river, 28 is cut off of the control cost, bringing the cost down to 12. This is why building your capital and governors on large river networks is best for spreading control when compared to roads. Roads, for their part, start off reducing control by 20 with the starting gravel road, increasing in increments of 5 up to the final railway, which reduces proximity costs by 35. So in a choice between rivers and roads, rivers are better for spreading control until the modern road, which is slightly better. You might think you can combine the two, but no, the game will only use the greater of the two. So if a river is available, gravel and paved roads will have no effect. And once modern roads begin to be built, rivers will stop having an effect on control. So that's how control moves over land. But what about sea? When control travels over sea, there are 2 things to be aware of. 1, harbour capacity, and 2, maritime presence. Let's first look at harbour capacity. When control leaves land and starts to move across the sea, the amount of control that is lost is based on the harbour capacity of the disembarking location. This is the same for control leaving the sea and arriving on land. A harbour with 1 capacity will reduce the control cost by 50%, but harbours can go beyond that 1 by building certain buildings, such as wharfs, which decreases the control cost even further. Next, for maritime presence, the same way all land tiles cost 40 control to pass through, all sea tiles cost 30. But of course, you can't build roads on the sea, so instead ships are used. Sea zones are broken up into provinces, and when a fleet is deployed in a sea zone, it increases maritime presence in all zones that are in the province. At the maximum level, maritime presence decreases the cost of passing through sea to 5 control, making it as good as a railway on land. But unlike railways, maritime maxing can be done at the start of the game, but does become easier as you gain access to newer and better ships, which provide more maritime presence. Slight addendum here about harbour capacity. You may find you have a location here with a harbour capacity, as we can see here, but when we look at proximity, it's not actually affecting the proximity cost. That's because every harbour essentially has a sea location it's tied to. If we zoom in, we can actually see the harbour here. It juts out into this sea, not this one. So because control is entering the location from this sea, the harbour capacity doesn't apply. And this works for every harbour. If the control is entering the location via sea, but not from the sea with the harbour doesn't come into effect. The solution in this case, and in most cases, would be to increase maritime presence so it becomes cheaper for control to travel up into this location and then down through the harbour. The game will always pick the best option to increase control, and we can actually check that. If we look at this, we can see the cost of just going onto the land from the sea here is 37. Based on the cost of going through this sea, is 16, so we can assume it's also 16 to come up to here. And because the harbour capacity is only 0.5, which reduces the cost by 25%, we know that this 37 cost would just be reduced by 25% if we were using the harbour. 25% of 37, well, let's round it up and say it's 40. So that would reduce the cost by 10. So it'd still be 27, then plus the extra 16 through travelling through the sea would result in a controlled cost of 43. So it would be more expensive to travel through the sea and then through the harbour. But as I said, if maritime presence was increased here, the cost of travelling through these provinces would be decreased, and once it would be, control would start to route through the sea and then through the harbour. It is important to know, though, that harbours have a set sea location. Both land and sea benefit from a modifier called proximity speed, which can increase or decrease control costs. Certain terrain will reduce proximity speed, and so increase the control costs. For example, jungles and mountains, with tribesman pops reducing proximity speed up to 100% based on their percentage of the population. Speed can be increased in a location mainly through buildings, those being bridges and pound lock canals, but development also increases speed. Outside of local sources, there are also national options. Laws, advances, government reforms, your ruler's admin skill, and the societal values centralisation and land. But why should you want to? Well, at 50% it reduces control costs by 25% in every location, and at 100% it reduces these costs by 50%. It does have diminishing returns after that point. Unfortunately, 200% speed doesn't reduce control costs by 100%. But even so, it's a very valuable modifier that can enhance the rate at which you spread control. These are the main ways of increasing control, but there are a few miscellaneous options. The increased control cabinet action, a few buildings like my beloved bailiff, the presence of friendly armies in the location and province, integration status of a location, -10 control as a non-core, then 5 as integrated and 20 as a full core, and finally the location's rank, 5 controls a town, 10 as a city, and 20 as a megalopolis. So if you're wondering how to improve control in EU5, remember these 4 things. Increase proximity speed, it's universally good. Prioritize the use of rivers where you can and build roads where you can't. Invest in harbours and fleets to spread control overseas, and remember that control only affects how much income can be taxed. Your estate's tax rate decides how much is taxed. Once you understand these 4 ideas, you've basically mastered the control system and can start using it to grow your economy. For now, this is the end of the video. I do hope it was helpful for you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.